Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on this Monday, Happy Labor Day edition of the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Real quick, go to duckterritory.com, subscribe for a 50% off membership. We're at the last couple of days for this promotion. You don't want to miss it out. Gets you all of this season, all of men's and women's basketball, all of baseball, spring football, summer recruiting. You get the whole shebang with that membership, and you save a huge chunk of money doing it. And it's the easiest, most impactful way to continue to support this podcast to ensure that we continue to do it. All right. We've got a couple questions for the mailbag. We've got a game to kind of discuss. There's going to be a lot to talk about.
Yeah. First half of the show is going to be kind of a bit of a look ahead at Tech, and then the second half we're going to kind of do some review. We've got 4 questions today from I think 2 or 3 of them are people I haven't seen their names in the questions, so excited to get kind of a new audience, new folks asking questions. First one we're going to start with, pretty simple here, from at SRV14. Does Texas Tech's loss help or hurt the Ducks? How? And for those who didn't follow along on Saturday, several hours after Oregon finished up its 81-7 win over Portland State, Wyoming held off Texas Tech in double overtime, 35-33. It's actually a pretty fun game to watch, regardless of rooting interest. And I think if you were an Oregon fan, your rooting interest would have been probably Texas Tech, just in terms of better to have your marquee non-conference opponent take care of business against Wyoming. But to this question, like, it's not ideal, and I think you would have preferred Texas Tech won. I don't know if it hurts all that much, because strength of schedule is not going to be Oregon's problem this year, regardless. So if they beat Texas Tech on Saturday, which I don't know, we'll have to look through and see what we think. We'll get through the week here and we'll make some predictions. But I don't know if it hurts or helps a whole lot one way or the other. But Texas Tech's loss doesn't strengthen Oregon's strength of schedule, but I think Oregon's strength of schedule is going to be pretty darn strong on its own, just because of the merits of conference play. So I probably lean it hurts a small amount, but it doesn't really hurt enough that it matters too much. But probably the biggest thing it does is take a little of the luster off of next week's game. Texas Tech would have been maybe kind of in the fringe of the back end of the top 25 kind of team, at least getting votes. Yeah. Now they won't be. But big picture, long term for the season, I don't know if this is going to be that big of a deal. I think if Oregon does what it needs to do throughout the year, they'll still have a chance to achieve the goals that they have. But again, this season is going to be determined for me in October and November, not September.
Yeah, I don't think it makes that big of a difference, to be quite honest with you guys. I mean, yeah, it would be great if they flied into Lubbock and Red Raider Stadium and it said 1-0 Texas Tech versus 1-0 Oregon. But in the grand scheme of things, Texas Tech was not a great out-of-conference opponent. They were better than Portland State, and they're going to be better than Hawaii. But this wasn't a Georgia. This wasn't like a non-con SEC opponent, a top 25 surefire team. I just don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. I think from a fan perspective, it certainly would have helped if Texas Tech had pulled out their game and won against Wyoming. But this is why you play the games. Texas Tech was like a 17-point favorite, and they end up losing by 2 in double overtime. Tech also blew a 17-point lead, so not exactly a great performance from them. But in the grand scheme of the course of the season, like Erik said, it's going to be Pac-12 and how they perform compared to whatever Texas Tech does. Like, if somehow by week 6, Washington were to have lost 2 or 3 games, that would be a huge problem for Oregon's strength of schedule. Or say USC does the same thing. Yeah. Like, that's what matters. Like, Texas Tech was neither a bump in the strength of schedule nor like a negative in their strength of schedule. So yeah, it would have been nicer if they won. It would have looked cooler. It would have had a little bit more hype instead of talking about Texas Tech losing to Wyoming. But I don't think it matters that much.
I kind of disagree. I think if you're Oregon, it helps that the Pac-12 is being viewed as a strong conference this season. But we know that the league eventually is going to beat up on itself. And there's going to be some cannibalization. Some of these perceived strength of wins in league are going to get knocked down a notch or two because a team's going to have one extra loss. You want every non-con opponent that you play to basically win every game they play except against you. And is it going to, like, grand scheme of things, change a whole lot? No, but it's better that they're 1-0 than 0-1. And it's better that if they are an 8-4 team at the end of the year than a 6-6 team, because people are going to look at, oh, you went and beat a team that struggled to be 500 on the road. Whoop-de-doo. That's going to matter. But on the grand scheme of things too, like, if you're Oregon and you go unscathed through the season, which has only happened once, and you emerge out of the Pac-12 championship game 13-0, it doesn't matter what Texas Tech did. You're in the college football playoff, and you're in there, and you're going to have probably the number 1 or the number 2 seed at that point. It only becomes a factor if you lose a game, and if you don't look good against Texas Tech, and Texas Tech is 7-5 on the season, that's going to cast just a little bit of human bias doubt into maybe how good you are. But is it detrimental to Oregon's schedule? No. Would it have helped? Absolutely. It was one of those, like, it's not going to hurt you, but it only could help you if they were 1-0 and if they continued to win after Oregon.
I think the last thing I'll say, we're talking about assuming Oregon beats Texas Tech. If Oregon were to lose to Texas Tech this weekend and Texas Tech had lost to Wyoming, that's where it maybe hurts you a little bit more. If we assume Oregon's going to beat Texas Tech, which I think I plan on predicting close to close the week here, but we'll get through the week and see. Then what Texas Tech does to me doesn't matter too much. The strength of that win doesn't matter that much to me. But if they lose this game, that becomes a loss that looks a lot worse. I mean, I was actually surprised looking at Tech was predicted to go 4th in the Big 12 this year, ahead of TCU, ahead of Baylor, which surprised me. I think it was Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas State at the top of the Big 12 preseason poll. All of that was sort of surprising to me, at least that Tech was up there that far. So this is supposed to be a pretty solid Big 12 team, and if they're able to put it together and beat Oregon and Lubbock, that's where them losing to Wyoming is problematic. I think if Oregon takes care of business and wins, it doesn't really matter. That's my stance.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that it would make a difference if Oregon were playing a real, like, out of conference opponent schedule. Like, Portland State, Texas Tech, and Hawaii are not necessarily like the biggest teams in the country going forward here, and it comes down to Pac-12 play, I think. And for Tech, like Matt said, yeah, it's only gonna help if they keep winning. It's not gonna hurt. So it's not. I just don't think it's that big of a bad mark on Oregon's end of the season grade. I don't think it's going to be a big difference. And to Eric's point, if Oregon just doesn't win, then all of this doesn't matter.
Yeah. All right. Second one, at Bigfoot8801. Despite Tech falling on their face this weekend, they should still be a better barometer for both sides of the ball. What do you expect to learn about the program? And he did write it that way. Matching up with Big 12 roster that we didn't learn from facing the Vikes. Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Well, I mean, like, there's several things here to start, and we're going to talk a lot about it this week. They're going to be facing a more competent quarterback. Tyler Shuck wasn't fantastic in this game, but he's a lot better than Dante Chachere. Shuck's numbers look better than I think they were, having watched the second half in the overtime periods. He was 31 for 47, 338 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. He also ran for 36 yards. We'll get more into Tyler and kind of his career post Oregon. I'm sure fans are curious to kind of hear our thoughts and what's transpired since he left Eugene after 2020. But that's just like a face value thing of, like, hey, you're going to be challenged a little bit more with a better quarterback. You're going to be challenged with better receivers. Tech, actually, looking through kind of their roster last year to this year, pretty similar group of skill guys. They added Dre McCray, who we remember was a big Oregon target at one point, that transferred out of Boston P. They have also brought back, I think, like 3 or 4 of their top receivers, their top running back. So it is a veteran, experienced skill position group. And just like across the board, like, this is probably obvious, like, Texas Tech's a much better roster than Portland State. So you're going to be challenged in a lot of different ways. I think the speed will be one thing. I think the strength will be another. I think Oregon's offensive and defensive fronts weren't particularly challenged this last weekend against Portland State. Not that anybody was really challenged, but those are areas you I think, especially with the offensive line and some of the questions people have, this will be a bigger challenge there. And obviously, to my first point, this will be a bigger challenge for the secondary. Dan even mentioned it post game, like they weren't tested against Portland State. Portland State's quarterbacks combined to complete 8 passes for like 50 yards.
Mhm.
There's no way that's going to be anywhere near what the final stat line looks like for Shuck and the Texas Tech offense. So yeah, you're going to be tested in areas we haven't seen tested, and there's several areas that going into the offseason were clearly areas that you wanted to see improvement, and we felt like we saw improvement against Portland State, but as we said going in, I don't think any of us wanted to feel like we took too much out of that game, regardless of outcome, and it was a pretty darn good outcome for Morgan. Tech will challenge you a little bit more. They'll throw the ball around. They'll have better skill guys. They've got a better quarterback, and then defensively, they're going to probably they'll challenge Oregon's offense a lot better in terms of getting after the quarterback, posing problems for that offensive line, providing some different looks. So we'll get into more of the matchups this week, but I guess it's a roundabout way of saying, like, I guess I'll be focused on the offensive line and the secondary in particular, because those are, I think, the 2 areas coming into the season we were most curious about. And dominating Portland State's one thing, facing a Big 12 team on the road's another.
Yeah, it's all the reasons that all the reasons we laid out before the Portland State game. We had already looked ahead to Tech. We had already figured that Portland State was not going to really challenge Oregon, and nor did they, in an 81-7 absolute thrashing. So not a lot of challenges there. Like Erik just basically ran through, I think it's going to be a test to every side of the ball. It's going to be a test to quarterback, running back. It's just going to be a significantly better opponent that they're facing. Tech runs an air raid system with Shuck at the helm. They're quick to get it out. Like Erik said, I watched probably 75-80% of that Wyoming game from like the second quarter on. Wasn't a great showing performance other than the last, I guess, the overtime period, and then the last drive down the field for Tech and Shuck kind of struggled at points. I think they're obviously more talented than Portland State is across every side of the ball. The secondary, this is going to be their first big test, just like we mentioned before Oregon even played Portland State. Like, this is going to be the barometer of how much this defense has improved. And we won't know until we go out and see it and see if they have improved. If it's the same old story. There were flashes of improvement against Portland State when they did decide to throw the ball, but we're not going to know until Tyler Shuck is out there trying to hit 7-yard out routes to see if Oregon is playing soft or zone coverage, or if they're manned up and trying to press at the line of scrimmage. We'll find out all of this on Saturday, but I think it's just all the outline that Erik just went through and what we went through on the Portland State podcast of, this is going to be a test of this entire team. This is just a significantly better opponent than Portland State.
I think the biggest things for me going in is just, how is Oregon going to respond to playing in a hostile environment? I mean, like, we made a big deal about a bunch of new starters here. We as in the media and people outside the program, 4 new starters. And, a lot of these guys have played college football, though, outside of Oregon, and they have a ton of experience. So this isn't going to be the first rodeo that these guys have had in a stadium where it's going to be raucous. It's going to be an interesting environment. It's not the biggest stadium in the world, but at the same time, like, that's what people say about Autzen, and people go in there and get shocked about how loud it is and how intense it is with the crowds. And Tech they've had games where they've looked really good in previous years against a non-conference or a conference opponent in a big marquee matchup. That environment's looked good, and it's just how does Oregon respond to that when the whole crowd is rooting against you? And apparently there's this tortilla thing that they throw onto the field, like, kind of get the crowd and the environment ramped up at Tech. That's apparently a thing for them. I'm curious to see how that plays out.
I've never heard of this, Matt. They throw a tortilla on the field?
Yeah, all the fans throw tortillas on the football field.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like a massive tortilla, like a size of the field size tortilla. I was excited.
Yeah. Apparently this has happened. Like, they throw I don't know what's the reasoning for it, but
okay,
there's like a tortilla that fans throw tortillas on the football field. I don't know if it's like onto the sidelines or like literally trying to get it onto the field or what, but You play a senior quarterback. I mean, look, we've seen Tyler Shuck. He's been at Oregon. He's been a starter for Oregon. We know his strengths, his weaknesses, but he's still a guy that threw for 338, 3 touchdowns, and I think he completed like 68% of his passes against Wyoming. If you don't play well, he can beat you. But if you play well, like we saw against Wyoming, Tech is susceptible to a loss, and Oregon should go in, and I think they're an early 7-point favorite or 8-point favorite. Oregon should go in there, and I think they should probably win by more than that. And if they play to their true potential, but we didn't learn a lot against Portland State. They weren't good, and like you said, Dan even came out and kind of said like we didn't get tested at all through the air, and that was one of our biggest concerns or questions or areas of focus going into the season is just how has Oregon's secondary improved, and they didn't get tested at all really against Portland State. So they should be fine. We should learn more about Oregon though this week, and just the depth, the talent, the individual skill sets that they have. And back to the last question, like what Erik said, if they lose this game, that's damning. Now they've lost to Wyoming. I mean, now it's almost turned into you better win this game in convincing fashion, because if you don't, if you have to come from behind in the fourth quarter, there's going to be some people that go, wow, that team lost to Wyoming last week and just almost knocked off a top 15 team at home. Like, what's wrong with Oregon?
2 other points of continuity before we hit the break, and then we'll talk about this throughout the week. Tim Druder, who was Oregon's defensive coordinator in 2021, is the defensive coordinator at Texas Tech. So it'll be somebody who at least has familiarity with the program, but the roster is so different and the scheme is so different that I don't know how much it matters, but I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that one for fans who maybe haven't looked ahead too much. And then the other one, and it's far smaller, is Terrell Tillman, who was a outside linebacker turned tight end at Oregon, is now outside linebacker at Texas Tech. I don't think he played hardly at all against Wyoming, so he's probably not a factor. But just a couple of points of carryover from Oregon. There are several individuals who were a part of the Oregon football program in the past who are now playing or coaching at Texas Tech.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into the second half of the pod. Welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. 2 questions in, a couple more to go.
Question 3 comes from Mav Eric Duck. Spells it the right way. Good job.
Ooh.
Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Couldn't watch the game because I don't have Pac-12 network. Didn't see any sacks in the box score. Is that concerning for our hopes of having an improved defense? First off, it's going to be fun when Oregon's not playing games on that network, because I don't think Eric is the only one having problems. I will say my dad, who was in Italy, was able to watch the game just fine on some sort of live stream he found somewhere on the internet. I don't know how he found it. So internationally, maybe it's easier than nationally, which is a huge part of the problem. But to your point,
the people that are on the Pac-12 networks are good. There's just the distribution absolutely sucks.
That's what I'm saying.
Can't wait to not have Sling ever again.
I didn't particularly think Lincoln Kennedy did a very, I don't know. I don't want to be too critical of on-air talent because I know full well how hard that is, but he didn't seem to be particularly familiar with a lot of Oregon's roster, having rewatched the game. To the real question, though, aside, we don't need to pick apart the network anymore, because this is the last year folks will have to deal with it. The no sacks in the box score, probably concerning at face value. Would have liked to get home. I did look through PFF's pressure stuff from the game. Oregon had, I think, a quarterback hit 5 hurries on 20 total dropbacks. So that means like 1/3 of the dropbacks, they were at least impacting the passer. And having watched the game, I would estimate that, what do you think, Jared? 7 or 8 of those passes from Chachere were like quick hitters where you weren't going to get much pressure or much impact in there. I don't have an exact count, but it was.
He had 14. I'd probably say 13 of them were. 12 of them were. He had the wheel route, and then the one that was to a misplay by Kamari Terrell. So at least 12 of them were quick hitters. He was not throwing the ball more than 6 or 7 yards down the field. Yeah,
so that part's going to make it deceiving. But Oregon really, especially when Brandon Dorlus got in the game, there was a shift. And I think probably 2 of his first 10 snaps on defense, maybe, he was in the backfield making things happen. Casey Rogers was impactful. Trying to think of anybody else. I guess I could look at the hurries. Mateo was credited with one, so was Connor Soley and Keonware Hudson. I didn't think it was fantastic, but kind of to the point we made earlier about the secondary not being tested. Well, Portland State's offense got to a point where they just stopped throwing the football. I mean, you think about a team that loses 81-7 and they only attempt 20 passes. Like that's actually something we haven't talked about. That's pretty interesting. Like they just didn't throw the football. I know part of it was they just didn't have any traction in the second half, but they ran it at least once on a third down play in the second half where it was just kind of, again, waving the white flag. So is it concerning? I don't know how concerning it is. You would have liked to see them get home, I guess, but I'm also not like more concerned coming out of this game by the pass rush based upon what I saw. There was just such a limited number of opportunities to do anything. And again, like you take basically a pressure rate of once every 3 downs. I think that's pretty solid. So it wasn't high volume opportunity, but I thought they were pretty good in the moments they did have. But again, we'll see. We'll learn a lot more this weekend in future games.
Concerning? No, not at all. Like to all the points that Erik just laid out, Portland State was not looking to try to throw the ball down the field. They were not going to give an opportunity for Sachere to be hurt, to get injured, to get sacked, to just take on a full hit from Jordan Birch or Brandon Dorless. And when Dorless came into the game, like Erik mentioned, the game, or at least the shift in the defensive line happened for Oregon. You know, he's just a he's just a home wrecker. He gets in there, he destroys an offensive lineman in front of him, especially one of the caliber of Portland State's offensive linemen. And he provides an opportunity for guys to get off the edge because they need to double team him. So if there's a double team on Dorless, that means there's one guy on Birch, there's one guy on Mateo, there's one guy on Popo. That's where this Oregon defensive line looks better. That's where they perform better. Tyler Shuck, I think, was sacked 4 times against Wyoming. I think they had 6 or 7 tackles for loss. The Wyoming defense did. I think Oregon is going to have plenty of opportunities to get to the passer against Texas Tech. I think, again, this goes back to our previous question about what are we going to learn when they play Tech. You're going to learn everything, and this is including. Like, you're going to learn everything about the team and the defensive line, and their pass rush capabilities are going to be included in that. So I feel good about it. I like what I saw from Birch. I like what I saw from Dorless, especially when those two were on the field together on the same defensive line. For me, I think a lot of the second half was just trying to get guys involved and trying to get the true freshmen to play and maybe get some reps for Mateo and Purchase. So this game might look a little different in terms of their rep counts and who they want out there on the field to get a pass rush. So I'm not concerned at all about Oregon's pass rush. I mean, maybe after Texas Tech, we'll get the same question. Then I'll have a different answer for you.
If I was told that Oregon would have 0 sacks in that game before the game started, I'd say, well, that'd be a surprise. But seeing how the game played out, seeing what Portland State did, I mean, they threw the ball just 20 times, and the number of times that Oregon got pressures on, I think it was 7. I mean, that's pretty good. And
Erik, you had 7, right? You were saying that earlier.
PFF had 6.
Yeah.
PFF had 6. The stat broadcast had 7 for Oregon. That's where I got the 7 from.
Sure.
But regardless, like, that's 1. I'm not concerned at all. We'll learn more, like Jared said, at Tech. And we may not learn actually anything at Tech too. Like, they're an air raid team, and maybe they employ the true air raid philosophy of, we're going to get the ball out quick. We're not even going to let the quarterback the defense have time to get to the quarterback to get sacks. So we might not know until when Oregon plays Colorado, because Oregon's next opponent, Hawaii, run and shoot, and they don't hold the ball very long either. So I think, like what Jared said, you saw guys get pressures. You saw what Mateo, Blake Purchase, Brandon Dorless, Birch, you saw what those guys were able to do and get to the court, get through the defensive line, or get through the offensive line, and kind of cause some havoc. those will eventually turn into sacks when they play teams that run a style that asks their quarterback to hold on to the football a little bit longer. Portland State just didn't try to throw. I mean, it was very evident at halftime or end of the second quarter when there was like a minute and 15 seconds left, and they just kneeled the football to get out of there. They were it was very clear they were trying to, let's get out of here as healthy as we possibly can at this point. We can't compete. That's what Bruce Barnum even said. Like, we're fast as an FCS team, but there's no way we match up well with Oregon's speed. He said that going into the game. So I think a lot of what we saw in the second half from Portland State was, this game is clearly over. We cannot physically match up with them. Let's just get out of here healthy the best way we can so that we can get to the next week and be prepared to compete at the FCS level, which, for Oregon, like, that's kind of the downside of playing these games, is sometimes you get some games where they pack it in.
And I think if Bruce Barnum, I haven't seen his post-game quotes. Obviously, he's really disappointed they got beat 81-7. I bet you he feels okay that their first team offense scored a touchdown against Oregon's first team defense. I bet you they come away feeling like, hey, that is a proof of concept that against a much better competition, we can move the ball and score. Obviously, the rest of the game proves we're a long ways away. But yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that part. All right, last one from a frequent question asker, Ross_Maselich. Which freshman impressed you most with their play on Saturday? #Autzen Audibles. We mentioned it right at the tail end of our recap pod on Saturday. Jaden Lamar and Dante Dowdell both scored touchdowns. Those are going to be probably the two most obvious ones, just because I think they both touched the ball, I don't have the box score in front of me, like 7 or 8 times each. At least on run plays. I know Lamar had 3 or 4 receptions.
8 rushes, yeah.
8 rushes each. Lamar had 4 catches. Dowdell did not have a catch. So those guys touched the ball combined about 20 times. So that's going to be the obvious and easy choice. And just to kind of assess their play, I don't know, they both played pretty darn well. I think you're encouraged by what you saw from both of them. I thought it was a little bit surprising that Lamar was on the field a little earlier than Dowdell, even though they ended up with probably very similar snap counts. But I think you kind of saw what both of them can provide. Lamar had a little bit more speed, a little more wiggle, was able to get on the edge a couple of times on swing passes and make something happen. They both found the end zone, and I think Dowdell to me was probably, if I'm picking between the two, more impressive, just because you saw the ability to just drag tacklers 4 or 5 yards downfield happen a couple of times. We wondered how that would transition from high school to college football against FCS competition. It looks like it does. We'll see how it works later on this season, when he gets in against Power 5 teams. I thought both of those guys certainly, I don't think anybody came away disappointed with how they performed. As Jared said, 8 rushes each. Dowdell averaged about 7 yards per carry. Lamar 6.4. That's pretty darn good. They both found the end zone. Don't have a whole lot more to add on those two. Jared, how about you? Would anybody stand out? And I guess those two are obvious on offense, but maybe on defense, a guy or two.
Defense, I mean, there's a clear answer in Mateo. I don't know if he had any counting stats though.
He had 3 tackles. He had 3 tackles.
Sorry, he had 3 tackles. I was thinking of Blake Purchase, who was the other guy who played a significantly, higher role than I anticipated. That's for sure. But Purchase finished with, I think, 14 snaps on defense, which was again more than I thought. I think he came in on the first or second series for Portland State. There's just not a lot of defensive guys who played a lot of snaps. I mean, Mateo obviously led the way, but that was only 22, and then Purchase at 14, Cole Martin 13. Dalen Austin did pretty well in his short period of time out there. I think he had 1 or 2 pass breakups. Tyler Turner had a pass breakup as well. That was kind of more of a bad throw, while Dalen Austin's was a better play. Not a whole lot of standouts. It was good to see everybody out there on the field. I thought the defensive line did pretty well just as a group. Terrence Green had 5 snaps, but 3 tackles or 2 tackles. He was rated pretty highly by PFF just in terms of being a destroyer of worlds and just going in there and beating up on Portland State's offensive line. So maybe he can be something, but I just like that they showed what kind of depth they've brought in from this past class, where I think it's basically everybody but Jerry Mixon at linebacker they have guys at every position that they need. And so I guess it's Mateo as a clear standout, but other than that, I don't really have an answer. Maybe it's just Terrence Green.
I was gonna say Terrence Green did lead the defense in PFF's grade in 5 snaps, so he's the pick, I guess.
That's exactly where I was gonna go. I want to go and see if we can find the 5 snaps that he played, and just watch it over and over again.
They were all the final drive, the 2 drives for Portland State. He had 2 tackles. He just beat up guys in the interior. It was when we were walking down the field. He just swim moved around a guy and got to the line of scrimmage, and just he was the biggest person on the field at that point. So I would expect him to do that, but it was nice to see, again, extremely limited sample size and against Portland State. But maybe this is kind of like the Jason Jones effect. Maybe he turns himself into a guy who gets into the rotation, or I don't know. But I liked what I saw from him in those 5 snaps.
I'll go offensively, Poncho. And not necessarily just because of, when he got in the game, I think they ran 4 straight plays to the right. And now I don't know if that was by design or if there was some handoffs that could dictate where the ball was going, and that's just kind of the read that they got. We don't know that. But I thought it was interesting, that he got in the game the 3rd or 4th possession of the first half for Oregon. And then when he did get in, they basically ran the ball 4 straight times to his side, and they scored a touchdown. Which to me, you can't be in there and not perform well in that scenario. So he obviously did something, but it's almost more so the fact that, hey, he was, I think, the first offensive lineman to come off the bench and get put into the game, which, whether it's injuries or whether guys were being held out for other reasons, we don't know. But the fact is, he was the first offensive lineman, to my knowledge, selected to go into the game as a backup, which says a lot to me, especially considering as a true freshman. So I don't need to spend too much time on the defense, but I would go Poncho.
I think maybe we should talk about things we saw in rewatch, because this is a little shorter pod, and then also the PFF snap count stuff that stood out. And the reason I thought of this is Poncho being, especially at right guard, was interesting, because that's where Junior Anguilao has repped. And that lets me talk about the fact that he only played 8 snaps and was not, I don't know if he played hardly at all in the first half.
He played, I think, the 4th quarter.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
think he played in the very last drive.
Yeah. There you go. So I didn't think he played hardly at all until late. So 8 snaps from him, that was interesting. I was a guy who I think when he transferred, the thought was, okay, he's probably going to be a starter. He started 30-plus games at Texas, missed all of the last season with an injury. You wonder if he's just having a hard time working his way back. There's been some transfers in the past, I guess even last year with I'm forgetting the name, the receiver from Texas A&M who
Caleb Chapman.
Caleb Chapman, there you go. Who just, their bodies wear down, and you get to a point in their career where you just don't have a whole lot to offer. And Chapman was the guy that they brought in who had some big moments at A&M. I think against Florida, he had a 2-touchdown, 100-yard game or something like that. He'd shown some stuff. Got to Oregon, body just didn't work, didn't end up being much of a contributor. I don't want to jump to any conclusions that that's Junior, but the first game, the fact that he hardly plays until the very end of the game when walk-ons are out there, another freshman, and that he only plays 8 snaps, that's a little bit surprising for sure.
Yes.
This goes to back what I was saying, though, and during the fall camp, where, again, we're just barely over a year from him tearing an ACL last year. This is what I was saying. His legs might not be there yet, and maybe he comes along. And maybe this is why Oregon went and got Nishad Strother out of the transfer portal after landing Anguilao and seeing him in camp. He's a guy who can play both positions. I think it was encouraging that he was out there, because we've never really seen him do anything on the football field. He didn't play in the spring game. We haven't seen him do a lot other than just some blocking drills that don't really have a pass rush in them and during practice. So I think it was at least encouraging to see him out there, but I'm not overly surprised by this, just because it takes a while to get the strength needed to be an offensive lineman after an ACL tear. It's one thing when you're a wide receiver and you can come back, you can get the speed and most of the strength that you need as a wide receiver. But for an offensive lineman who guys pride themselves on being able to squat over 500 to 600 pounds. Like, you need an incredible amount of strength to be an offensive lineman, and I think he's still just working back from that. I think it's encouraging that he played in the game. I know that was in garbage time and it was like the very last drive of the game for Oregon, but I think it's at least a little bit encouraging that he got in.
I'm not going to agree with this comment, but I'm going to present it more so. If he was eventually going to become the guy that would take over things at that guard spot or would play a lot more, and they're just easing him in due to injury, why would they even play him in the last 8 snaps of the offensive drive in that game? It wasn't worth it to me in that regard. I'm just presenting that idea. I don't know if I even agree with that line, but to me, that's where, like, because I agree, like with Jared said, it takes a long time for guys to recover from injuries like that. And I mean, the most notable thing I remember about the tight ends this summer for fall camp was Drew Merringer saying Patrick Herbert's going to look like a different person because he's a full year removed from recovery from his injury. And he did look like a different player when he was out there on Saturday. And so we're seeing Junior Angelau just get to that 1 year mark post-injury, and every day is going to be a little bit better and better. But if he's not all the way there yet, why even risk it against Portland State with the games that, the game and time that he entered the game, that's what makes me confused by it.
Game reps.
Why did Bo Nix start the second half when they were up 50-7? It's game reps. It's just trying to get guys acclimated to their system. They must feel really good about Poncho and having him play right guard, like Erik mentioned. So if he just wants to take it slow and they just want to give him 8 to 10 reps in that game, I don't think it's a big problem, because they must feel good about Poncho and his ability to play right guard. They probably feel good about Strother coming back and being able to play one of the guard positions. I think it's just about game reps. I think that was a lot of the Portland State game, at least in the second half, was like, all right, we need to continue to get these guys to build some chemistry and mesh together.
Jared, you wrote about on Duck Territory, and for those who want to get kind of a breakdown who aren't members over at PFF, Jared did cover kind of what he saw. What are there anything? I mentioned Angulau and his few number of snaps. Was there anything that really jumped out when you were going through that exercise of putting that together?
I'm trying to think of stuff that really, really jumped out. Marcus Harper, is who we thought he was. He's a very good pass blocker, but maybe not a great run blocker. Yeah. And that was kind of evidence towards what direction Oregon ran in on Saturday. Matt was talking about how they went to the right side a lot with Poncho in the game. Oregon went to the right side of the line kind of frequently, on the outside of Johnny Cornelius or whoever was at right tackle, and trying to set the edge at the tight end. They did that 13 times, the most out of any, place on the offensive line where they could run. But they, upon watching the game over again, they had a lot of quick hitters to the left side of the offensive line, just like not screens, but guys coming in motion, and they're trying to confuse the defense, a fake handoff, an RPO, and Bo Nix just dumps it out to Tez Johnson or Troy Franklin running around the left side of the line. So I think there's something to that. I don't think it's a lot, but Marcus Harper has performed, at least by the PFF standards, has performed very well in pass blocking, but not great in run blocking. Did the same thing on Saturday. Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly graded out really well. And again, this is against Portland State, but mildly encouraging. Offensively, not a whole lot here. I think people played how we saw they played in the game. Like, okay, this guy did really well, so his PFF grade, that reflects it. Defensively, I think there were a couple interesting things here. Some poor tackling grades, but I think those are mostly because of one or two moments. And I think they all came on the drive that Portland State scored a touchdown on. If you go rewatch it, those are the two chunk plays, the Sachere run, and then whoever the running back was, Grubb maybe. I don't remember who it was who had that big one.
It was it wasn't
Craig.
Grubb.
It was Quincy Craig.
There you go.
Those are just misses. These were Dan talked about in the post game. Like, two guys messed up. Well, upon further review, yeah, two guys messed up. It was Jeffrey Bassa and Mateo Uiagalelei on the first one, and then it was Casey Rogers and I think Mateo Uiagalelei on the next one. Like, they just got juked out of their shoes. They crashed too hard on the offensive line, and the running back went right around them. So some of that's reflected in their PFF grade, like especially their tackling grade. I think Bossa got dinged up on the not physically dinged up, but his grade got dinged up on the wheel route where Tysheem Johnson made the play over the top.
Then there was also a scramble on the drive. There was another drive that I think they made a little bit of hay, and 2 drives after the scoring drive, and it started because of another mistake by Bassa where he jumped in the air and Cheshire ran through him for about a 15-yard gain.
Oh, yeah. I don't even know if I would qualify that as a mistake from Bassa. I would say that it was a good play by Sasha to pump fake, get his guy in the air, and then go by. Like his grade.
To why maybe the grade. Because if you do, I mean, I hate making the podcast a drag Jeffrey Bassa pod, but the PFF grade is quite similar to what it was a year ago, and that's not a good thing for those that have listened for a while. There were a couple of plays that weren't great there. I thought Jamal missed a run fit as well on the Craig run. I think he was a little bit out of position, but regardless, you're right. It was front 7 guys that made mistakes on those plays. I think pretty clear when you watch it. And Taishi made a heck of a play to recover on that wheel route, but Jeff was a step slow, and I think identifying and getting where he needed to go.
Yeah, I thought that was a great play by Taishi. Awesome. I thought that's a play that doesn't happen last year, and that Oregon just doesn't have the personnel to prevent that from happening. I guess the nice thing is that 19 Oregon players had a tackling grade above 70. That's not something that they saw a lot last season. Bassa, for as much as we just kind of tore him apart right there, second on the team in tackling, 80.2. Tysheem was number 1, 81.7. Steve Stevens and Bryce Betcher, Connor Soley kind of round out the top 5. So 2 linebackers, a couple safeties, or 3 linebackers and a couple safeties. Yeah, I thought it was, at least from a PFF perspective, it's exactly what you think it would be. The team won 81-7. The grades are good. That should happen. There are some things that I'll have to go back, watch, and each individual snap and kind of get a feel for and how that was graded. But overall, nothing incredibly surprising about what you'd expect in an 81-7 win. I'll be more interested next week to see the snap counts for that, because the highest snap count on either side of the ball was Jackson Powers Johnson at 50.
Yep.
He played all center, obviously. The highest on defense was Tysheem at 41, and then it drops off by 10 to Brian Addison at 31, and then down to 30 and 28. So defense, they rotated a lot of guys. Offense, they kept the offensive line out there for a long time, like I had anticipated. But still, only 50 snaps. I think it was like 45 or 47 to Josh Connerly. So I think we have a pretty good idea about the guys that they like. But next week's snap count is going to be way more interesting.
Do we know if Connor Soley's 5 tackles, how many of those came on special teams, or was that primarily defense? Because his play per tackle rate is pretty damn impressive. 18 total plays and 5 tackles.
Yeah, I mean,
that's really good. Very productive from when he's out there. Because I know he has a quarterback hurry. I'm just kind of curious of if that was a special teams ace, which was kind of what we thought he was going to be when he showed up, or if it was him just being a ball hawk on the field.
I think Oregon had only had 1 tackle in special teams, and that was the very first kickoff.
Yeah.
Huh. So
that wasn't him because
it was all touchbacks. It was all touchbacks, and the one that he fumbled.
Yep. So no, it was all game tackles, and they all came. Most of them came in the fourth quarter. Just run plays. It was Portland State waving the white flag like we talked about, and they're just running right up the middle. Connor Soley was like, "All right, I'll take it. Let's go."
Yeah. But that's still what you want from a linebacker is even if they're running the football and it's coming, he knows where to go and get through the fits and get the tackle, which hasn't always been the case at Oregon for some linebackers in previous years. All right. I think that's it on today's show. So thank you for listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast. We'll be back tomorrow where we break down some comments from Dan Lanning and some Oregon players getting ready for the Texas Tech game on Wednesday. We are going to have someone from our Texas Tech site come on and kind of preview the game. And then on Thursday, we'll have our game prediction podcast go up like we did last week. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.